The word graffiti comes from the Italian word for scrawling. Graffiti has been around for almost as long as civilization itself. From ancient rock etchings in Pompeii to the intricate tags on Los Angeles buildings, graffiti has embedded itself in societies across the world. In the last few decades, graffiti has been put into the spotlight due to hip hop and rap music. Despite its rise in popularity, many people in graffiti groups known as crews are often arrested and charged with vandalism for painting on private or public property. This brings up an important question. Has graffiti become a culturally rich art medium, or is it just a crime of vandalism? In order to address the outbreak of graffiti in Toronto, the city started taking progressive steps just last year. While also tracking down on illegal graffiti, a specific series of paint-covered backstreets known as Graffiti Alley have recently become sanctioned areas with the purpose of preserving the graffiti written there. A graffiti panel made up of 5 city staffers with backgrounds in art, urban design, and architecture was formed late in 2012 to decide what gets sanctioned for graffiti. At the same time, the simultaneous crackdown on illegal graffiti has made this a tricky ordeal as to what exactly gets preserved. Even if it's Picasso, you're not allowed to paint on other people's walls, said Elise Parker, the city official who is leading Toronto's crackdown. The panel does not believe that simply sanctioning certain areas will stop graffiti artists from vandalizing other places. Other communities have preserved graffiti that has been considered culturally important. Late last year, an old rusty, graffiti-smudged water tower on Alcatraz Island was replaced and adorned with a replica of the red etchings that were once on the old tower, reading, "Peace and Freedom, Welcome, Home of the Free Indian Land." The graffiti was originally from the 19 months in which Native American activists claimed the island for their own 4 decades ago. Normally, the federal government isn't the one interested in preserving graffiti, but the location is an important part of the history of Alcatraz Island. Because of its location, the graffiti on the water tower is seen by nearly every tourist that visits the island every day. Graffiti isn't all about art and important messages. Many people scrawl vulgar writing on places like bathroom stalls or construction sites for the purpose of spreading hate and ignorance. The side of the new Freedom Tower in New York, now named the One World Trade Center, has been defaced with slander written all throughout the construction site. These examples of graffiti are all extremely racist and sexist in nature, from racist comments towards African Americans, Middle Easterners, and Irish, to sexist comments towards women. People are downright shocked when they see such hateful slander defacing such an important place for the American people. The NY Daily News has reported that while some effort is made to paint over the hateful graffiti, neither Tishman Construction nor the Port Authority make it a priority, and the racist writers are ever relentless. While some graffiti can be considered works of art, and graffiti made by street artists like Banksy often sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, most of what exists is very amateurish and more frowned upon than the infinitesimal amount of graffiti that can actually be sold at auctions. It may be art, but it's illegally applied, Henry Klein, an artist and homeowner, wrote to LA Times from Valley Village. A writer from LA Times went to the cozy California neighborhood to find an alley visible from the street that was filled with colorful graffiti that and contrasted sharply with the earth-tone houses and white picket fences. Henry Klein called the police on the artists the first time he saw them. The police came and immediately told Klein that had been the 3rd time that they were called into the alley in the past week. It turned out the kids writing graffiti were from the nearby North Hollywood High School and had been given permission by the owner of the property. The artists weren't vandals, they had been given permission. Although Barbara Black, the homeowner of the property, said the city fined her because the art used lettering, that meant that the graffiti qualified as advertising, which is prohibited in residential areas. The other residents of Valley Village were reported to have been okay with any other kind of mural, but the style of the graffiti made it seem, in Henry Klein's opinion, like it was related to gangs. The writer from LA Times wrote that it seemed to him that the art has to be beautiful or powerful enough to persuade the people who live with and near it of its right to exist, and that some places are probably better suited to it than others. To the writer, the quiet Californian suburb wasn't such an ideal place. What gets much less publicity than the business of graffiti is the business of anti-graffiti, but at the same time it's still large in its own right. An article on Reason.com claims that most estimates pull annual spending on graffiti abatement in the U.S. at somewhere between $15 to $20 billion. Last January, a meeting called Zero Graffiti International Conference was held in San Francisco. For 3 days, more than 150 attendees from 52 cities around the world gathered in a conference room below St. Mary's Cathedral to discuss new enforcement technologies and successful abatement tactics towards graffiti, as well as to view the product lines of the 13 exhibitors at the simultaneous vendor show. The people attending the conference were for the most part mostly just cops, city workers, and officials, concerned citizens, and sales reps selling environmentally friendly graffiti barrier coatings. While the local government and graffiti abatement companies were represented, there were no people with areas in the arts, architecture, and other culturally relevant fields present at the conference. Zero Graffiti International's focus is fixated on stopping graffiti as opposed to giving it an unbiased view. Keep in mind that people with graffiti written on their property are required to remove it, and as often as soon as 48 hours before, being fined hundreds of dollars. It is clear that the artistic, government, and corporate sectors have turned graffiti or stopping graffiti into a commodity in some form. Gallery owners make money selling their street art, corporations make money off of abatement, and the government cashes in on the prohibition of graffiti. Classifying graffiti subjectively ultimately depends on how one looks at it. Writing on other people's property is bottom line vandalism and against the law. It doesn't help that graffiti is also associated with gangs marking their turf. At the same time, there are plenty of artists out there that only paint on walls to express themselves anonymously. As mentioned before, art critics and buyers consider some of these examples of street art to be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. From painstakingly made street art to bathroom scrawl, graffiti is extremely varied in the forms it takes. Regardless, what it all has in common is that all graffiti are anonymous artifacts of uncensored information in street culture that can be found on any large surface. What makes graffiti art or vandalism really depends on the context. But since it is so varied in nature, it is impossible to put graffiti into one category or the other. It is simply both vandalism and art depending on the context.